of the public may listen in to and watch this meeting, and there will be time for questions and comments after the presentation. During the presentation, all public lines are muted. Any chat messages will go only to the host of the meeting, Ana Ramos, so please limit the chat to questions or problems you may be having hearing or seeing presentations. The purpose of this information session is to engage early to hear comments and feedback from members of the interested public regarding regional haze activities in preparation for the formal public rulemaking process in January of 2021. This is also an opportunity for DEQ to acquaint or reacquaint some of you with the accomplishments of our Regional Haze Program. DEQ anticipates the presentation to take a little less than half hour, with time for questions and comments at the end. Members of the public participating by phone, please put your name and organizational affiliation, if you have any, in the chat box in Zoom. Now I'll pass it off to Ali Mirzakhalili, our Air Quality Administrator, and Michael Orman, the Planning Section Manager, to welcome you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dee. Good morning, everybody. My name is Ali Mirzakhalili. I'm the Air Quality Division Administrator at DEQ. Again, I'm here, as Dee said, to welcome you to the first Regional Haze Information Session for the program's second planning period. And thank you for taking the time to join us here today. You're looking at my picture at one of the popular spots for selfies at the magnificent Crater Lake National Park. So imagine if the view was hazy and the outer edge of the crater was blurred. That visibility impairment happens on some days, and this program is designed to curb that and return visibility across our beautiful landscape to natural conditions over a multi-decade effort. The economic benefits of this program and its impact on tourism is rather obvious. But regional haze is important not only because we value our scenic views, but it is also important because it reflects our quality of life and public health. What causes regional haze is air pollution, and air pollution negatively impacts our health. Therefore, this program, when implemented properly, gives us great views, but it also helps us improve our air quality and our health. As we will present later, there are many contributors to this pollution, and we intend to pursue strategies that will help us continue to make progress and ultimately meet our goal. Again, thank you all for joining us today, and I will now turn things over to Michael Orman, our Air Quality Division's Planning Chief. It is all yours, Michael.
Good morning, folks. Thanks, Ali. As Ali mentioned, this meeting is our first opportunity to engage with the public on a long planning process for regional haze. Oregon, along with a number of Western states, have been working collaboratively to understand the progress that has been made over the years to reduce haze in our national parks and wilderness areas. And we're excited to be able to present some of that information to you today. Along with this public presentation, DEQ is also participating in formal consultations with other Western states, with federal land managers like the National Park Service and U.S. Forest Service and EPA. We've also been working directly with industrial sources in Oregon to understand their emissions and opportunities for further reductions. Ultimately, this work will conclude with a state implementation plan submittal to EPA in July of 2021 that includes a listing of the various efforts that will keep us on the path towards our long-term goals for reducing haze. I want to take a moment to acknowledge the time and effort that DEQ staff have put into this regional haze planning process thus far. We wouldn't have been able to bring this presentation to you today without the hard work of numerous DEQ technical, communications, permitting, and planning staff. I also want to acknowledge and thank the facilities that we've been working with for their time and work to support our planning efforts. And with that, I'll pass the mic back to Dee to provide you with more details on our progress, our plan for additional reductions, and our timeline for rulemaking and future engagement opportunities.
All right, thank you, Michael. Well, first I thought we'd start off by defining regional haze. So regional haze is defined in the Clean Air Act as visibility impairment that is caused by emission of air pollutants from numerous anthropogenic or human-generated sources located over a wide geographic area. And I think, visibility then is how far and how well you can see a distant object. The measure for visibility is a deciview, and that is calculated in terms of visibility impairment. So a clear day has good visibility and low deciviews, while a hazy day has low visibility and high deciview impairment. To illustrate this, this picture shows a clear day looking east along the Columbia River Gorge National Scenic Area, where visibility is pretty good, but there's some haze, as you can see in the distance. Visibility is greater than 100 miles in this picture, and visibility impairment is low, with 9 deciviews of impairment. The second picture shows a hazy day at the same location when visibility would have been less than 25 miles and visibility impairment would have been pretty high at 23 deciviews of impairment. The clearest visibility is around 230 miles and it's limited by the natural light scattering in the atmosphere. So in general, low deciviews means better visibility and high deciviews means more haze or poorer visibility. The class 1 areas that we're talking about are national parks and wilderness areas. They were designated by Congress in 1977, national parks over 5,000 acres and wilderness areas over 6,000 acres. Visibility was identified as an important value in these natural areas, as Ali said, for both economic reasons as well as sort of other value-based reasons. There are a total of 156 class 1 areas in the country. On this map, you see Oregon's 12 class 1 areas in green, from Kalmiopsis in the southwest corner of the state to Crater Lake, Mountain Lakes, and Gerhardt Mountain in the Klamath Falls and southern central part of the state, up through the Cascades, Diamond Peak, Three Sisters, Mount Washington, Mount Jefferson, and north to Mount Hood, and then east to Strawberry Mountain and Eagle Cap Wilderness areas, and finally on the eastern border with Idaho, the Hells Canyon Wilderness area. The Columbia River Gorge National Scenic Area in teal straddles the Columbia River between Washington and Oregon. The yellow stars on this map represent the placement of the monitors used to measure visibility impairment. They are part of the Improve Monitor Network. Improve stands for Interagency Monitoring of Protected Visual Environments, and they are managed for the most part by federal land manager partners, such as the National Park Service and the U.S. Forest Service. In this slide, we talk about how visibility impairment and visibility improvement are measured. So the Regional Haze Program requires improvement in the 20% haziest days or worst, most impaired days, and no degradation of the 20% best days out to 2064. The baseline years, here represented with the green X, are the average of the visibility from 2000 to 2004. The goal of natural conditions in 2064 is in blue and out in the bottom right-hand corner of the chart. The glide path is the line from the baseline conditions out to the goal of the final goal of natural conditions. The reasonable progress goals, which is a lot of what we'll be talking about, and what the what our emissions controls are designed to meet, are the sort of the point along the glide path for each of the marker years. So 2018 was the sort of when we set the last reasonable progress goal. And in this planning period, we're evaluating our progress against that 2018 goal. And then we are setting our 2028 reasonable progress goal. Let's see. Yes. Sources of visibility impairment throughout the nation, and especially in Oregon, come from a variety of both natural sources and human-generated sources. Natural sources include wildfires, dust, volatile organic carbons from trees and other vegetation, and marine salt, while human-generated or anthropogenic sources include motor vehicles, wood stoves, shipping, agricultural and dairies, and field burning activities. Additionally, the Earth's atmosphere has a certain amount of natural light scattering, or haze. Some of the pollutants which form haze, as Ali mentioned, have been linked to serious health problems. For example, particulate matter pollution is a major cause of haze. 2 other major pollutants that we consider in the Regional Haze Program include nitrogen oxides and sulfur dioxides. The good news is that many of the regional scale emission sources, such as motor vehicles and wood stoves, their emissions are going down over time because of new controls. And the motor vehicle fleet is getting cleaner, and we see improvement in the data with haze levels going down. The next couple of slides will talk about the specific regional haze planning efforts in Oregon. So in 2009, the Environmental Quality Commission adopted the first regional haze plan for Oregon. The plan included a comprehensive review of visibility conditions in Oregon's Class 1 areas. It included an evaluation of BART eligible sources and requirements for retrofit controls at PGE Boardman, as well as federally enforceable permit limits at 4 other sources. And additional changes were made to the smoke management plan and the Willamette Valley field burning rule to limit and minimize the contributions of smoke to visibility impairment in those national parks and wilderness areas in the state. The 2017 5-year progress report evaluated progress in the previous 5 years towards those 2018 visibility goals. We continued to see emissions reductions from the facilities in the first period. Visibility improved on best and worst days, and most of the Class 1 areas were meeting their 2018, were projected to meet the 2018 reasonable progress goals at that time. In this round, the requirements for the Regional Haze State Implementation Plan or plan were shifted somewhat, and so the most recent rule update was in December 2017, and the guidance was issued in August 2019. It includes a review of visibility conditions in Oregon Class 1 areas. The change in the regional haze rule in 2017 attempts to account for wildfire impacts and focus attention and efforts on those human-generated or anthropogenic impacts. And we are directed to look at stationary sources as well as mobile and area sources, and we will need to set reasonable progress goals for 2028. 1 second, I think I see that there might be some comments. Let's see. There is a question: is the Columbia River Gorge National Scenic Area a Class 1 area or not? Does it have any requirement for protection under the visibility program? The Columbia River Gorge is not a formal Class 1 area. However, in the Gorge's management plan, and as a result of studies that were conducted by the Southwest Clean Air Agency and Oregon DEQ, as well as a planning process, the Regional Haze Program sort of takes care of air quality in the Gorge. And so we do evaluate the improved monitor. It's not an improved network monitor formally, but it does the same things that the regional haze monitors that are part of the improved network do. And when and if things in the Gorge look like they're going differently than the sort of closest Class 1 area, which is Mount Hood, then we would take that into account. In addition, we do give reports, and we've been coordinating with the Columbia River Gorge Commission to give updates and to update them this planning period. Thank you. Feel free to ask more questions if you need to, and Anna will shoot them over to me as we go. So the good news is that in the first planning period, overall visibility is improving. What you'll see in the differences in the maps from the left to the right is that some of the worst visibility areas, which are mostly on the East Coast, the red and orange areas, have largely disappeared by the second planning period. And then you see the expansion of the sort of the better visibility, which is the areas in purple, blue, and green. And you see that especially in the west part of the country, the western half of the country. The National Park Service estimates that as of 2014, the emissions controls established under the first planning period, and this does include, a lot of other programs that are in addition to regional haze, such as the acid rain program and other things like that, led to approximately 500,000 tons per year reduction of sulfur dioxides and 300 tons per year of nitrogen oxides. And EPA estimates that visibility has improved significantly across the nation, with the average visual range increasing by 20 to 30 miles in Class 1 areas. So we're going to turn now to looking at Oregon data and if Oregon is meeting our reasonable progress goals. Uh-oh. There we go. So the answer is in 2018 in the map on the left, for the most part, I mean, we are, right? So and that was in 2018. And so what this map shows is that the areas that are covered by the Mount Hood monitor, the Starkey monitor, which covers Strawberry Mountain and Eagle Cap and Hell's Canyon, we are what's called below the glide path. We are meeting the goals, and then we are very close. We're within 5% of the goal for the other areas, for Kalmiopsis, for Crater Lake, and the 2 other areas that are covered by it, and for the Mount Washington, Mount Jefferson, Three Sisters, and Diamond Peak that are covered by the Three Sisters monitor. What we also see in this map, in the figure on the right, is that by 2028, those gains are large that we realized in the first planning period are largely disappeared, and we will be above the glide path if no further pollution reductions are realized. And so those are the areas in red. And then you see that the lighter green areas are areas that are below the glide path, but within 5%. And then Mount Hood continues to be okay, but the sort of the amount of that we're below the glide path shrinks significantly. And for those of you who like data and charts, I wanted to show you where this comes from. So this is a chart for Crater Lake that comes off the Western Regional Air Partnership technical website, and I'll put the link up in a second. And so what you see is the top red line, which is where we're going to focus, which is what these 2 maps and charts show, are the most impaired days. The first thing to notice is the green bar on the left top, and that is the baseline from 2000 and 2004. The second thing that we're looking at, which is represented in the map on the left, is the average from 2014 to 2018 on the most impaired days. And as you can see, that's below the glide path. And then what you see in these 2 diamonds here, the red and orange diamonds, are the modeled visibility impairment by 2028 for what's on the books, what we know is slated to happen. And as you can see, those are on or above the glide path. And so that's what you're seeing represented on the map on the right. And that's the website to get additional monitoring and modeling results for each of the class 1 areas with additional information, as well as, right. So that's where we are. And so that really does establish a case that we need to look carefully at what's happening and realize some additional pollution reductions in this period. In addition, I want to mention that even for the monitors where we're above the glide path right now, and we look like we're going to be above the glide path in 2028, it turns out that when you look at nitrogen oxides, we look like we are not meeting our goals for nitrogen oxides. And so we do need to look at nitrogen oxide across the state. Great. So we're going to turn our attention to what is happening in terms of pollution reduction. In the regional haze rule for this round, we're required to look at stationary sources, mobile sources, and area sources. For stationary sources, the analysis to look at what pollution control has 4 factors. They are the cost of control, the time necessary to install controls, energy and other non-air impacts, and remaining useful life. Time necessary to install controls is pretty self-explanatory. Remaining useful life is also pretty self-explanatory. Those are time necessary to install controls is usually a couple years. Remaining useful life is usually found in either the EPA cost control manual or from manufacturer information and vendor information, things like that. It varies very specifically on a specific facility. So all of this information is fairly, it's really hard to use generic estimates. There's a lot of details that are very facility specific. The cost of control is calculated per ton of pollutant that's reduced. And energy and other non-air impacts can include things like water quality impacts, as well as I think some of the environmental advocate groups have talked about wanting environmental justice or greenhouse gas impacts and other things like that. So we're looking at some of those things. In terms of facilities, how we selected them for that 4-factor or controls analysis, this is based on the requirements in the rule and the guidance. We looked at facilities inside and outside the state of Oregon. We considered the impacts of Oregon facilities on other states' Class 1 areas. Those are the areas in purple. And the green dots are those facilities. Those are Title V facilities. In Oregon, we also considered some of the smaller emitting facilities that don't have a Title V permit. And, you know, for the most part, they screened out, but there were some that screened in. So we did have one of them out of the 31 facilities that were selected for sort of a deeper dive into pollution controls analysis. PGE boardmen, we did not send a letter to them because they had anticipated a December 31st, 2020 shutdown date. As many of you will have seen by now, they did announce that they formally closed the doors on their coal-fired part of their operations out at Boardman last week. Since that letter was sent out in December of 2019, the facilities were given to May 31st, 2020 to sort of complete the analysis. That was extended to June 15th due to COVID-19. DEQ reviewed that information, and in mid-August, DEQ sent out a request for additional information to a subset of those facilities. By mid-September, they needed to provide some additional information. We are in the process of undergoing additional review, and DEQ anticipates having some strong recommendations and decisions by the end of November and certainly by the end of the year. The map below shows the locations of the facilities that were selected for initial review. In addition to the pollution reduction that we anticipate from stationary sources, DEQ spends a lot of staff time and energy on mobile source and area source reduction. This includes for diesel engines, medium duty and heavy duty diesel engines. There are in-use rules on emissions controls within the Portland metro area. And in addition, we are looking at adopting the engine standards that California just adopted through the Section 177 provisions. In construction, we have a voluntary clean construction standard. And I believe that's, well, I'll just leave that. But a lot of and for school buses and other, through the Volkswagen and Dura program, there are diesel engine changeouts for school buses, and through Volkswagen, some other types of engines can be changed out. We can provide more detail if people want it, either in the question or answer, or certainly there will be more detail included in the plan. In addition, in this section, I will talk about programs designed to reduce pollution from passenger vehicles and from fossil fuel use in general. Here, DEQ's vehicle inspection program ensures that vehicles registered in the testing area, Portland and Medford, meet certain emission standards prior to renewal of registration. The Clean Fuels program mandates increased availability of lower carbon fuels such as ethanol, biodiesel, renewable diesel, electricity, hydrogen, and fossil and renewable natural gas and propane in the state, and has increased the availability and use of these lower polluting fuel options. There is also indirect source construction permitting, which is mandatory for the construction of parking spaces greater than 1,000 or 800 in the Portland Central City. The low emission vehicle program requires strict emission standards for the reduction of criteria pollutants and greenhouse gases, while the zero emissions vehicles programs requires manufacturers to deliver a certain percentage of zero emissions vehicles to Oregon. The Oregon Clean Vehicle Rebate Program incentivizes the purchase of new and in some cases used electric vehicles in the state. And finally, the Employee Commute Options Program is mandatory for employers with at least 100 employees in the Portland area. I see that there was a comment or a question. From Michael Lang, please provide copies of the letters to sources Thank you. Michael, some of those letters are up on the web and we'd be happy to connect afterwards. Thank you. So let's see, in terms of pollution reduction in area and other sources, for prescribed fire, the smoke management plan does limit the intrusion of smoke into Class 1 areas. For residential wood combustion, which is a very important source of pollutants in certain parts of the state, there's the Heat Smart program, as well as the voluntary incentive-based change-out programs in some parts of the state. DEQ anticipates looking more closely at agriculture and dairies and open burning in the next 5 years, since we recognize that they are significant contributors to both particulate matter and nitrogen oxides that contribute to visibility impairment in Class 1 areas. I wanted to give you quick notes on airports and rail. While both of those sectors are really not controlled by states for the most part, I think airports, especially the Port of Portland, are doing a lot in terms of electrifying their ground vehicle fleet and reducing emissions in that area. And in rail, there are some things that are happening across the state. But for instance, the change from higher sulfur to lower sulfur diesel fuel that's used by a lot of the locomotives is decreasing the emissions from those sources. I'm going to switch gears now to just talk about the path to July 31st, 2021, and what stakeholder engagement and public engagement, what DEQ anticipates that will look like between now and then. As you've seen, the data analysis and modeling is ongoing. That's anticipated to be wrapped up by the end of this year or very early in 2021. Similarly, we anticipate the source contribution and controls analysis to be wrapping up this quarter. As you've seen, consultations have been ongoing for about the last year and a half. And this is sort of the first public information session, and we anticipate the start of formal rulemaking in January. So the Rules Advisory Committee and Fiscal Advisory Committees are scheduled to start again in January. Oh, I forgot to note that we will have a second stakeholder information session in December. The date is December 3rd, same time, same channel. And there's some requirements by federal and state rule for advanced review for the federal land managers for the draft plan, regional haze plan. They need a 60-day to review. So that needs to start in early February so that they have the full time allotted to review. And DEQ anticipates that will be followed immediately by public comment. There's a 45-day minimum public comment period for state implementation plans and Oregon rules. And then DEQ needs some time to respond to the public comments. And then it will go in front of the Environmental Quality Commission in July, ideally for approval in time for final SIP submittal to EPA by July 31st. I'm going to pass it on to Michael to close us out.
Thanks, Dee. Yeah, with this being our first opportunity to engage with all of you on this regional haze planning process, we thought it would be helpful for us to get some feedback from all of you through a poll function in Zoom to help guide some of the future content that we bring to you in December. And so if you don't mind responding to the poll questions here, let us know where your interest areas are, and that will help us in making sure that the content that we bring is focused. And so please choose all that apply.
All right, Michael, we're starting to see these tail off a little bit with about 50 responses. out of 90+ people on the call right now. I'll give a few more seconds so we see people coming in.
Give it another 20 seconds here and then we'll close it up.
Sounds good. Okay, I think that's pretty good. We're at about 60 responses, and we're seeing 20% of respondents were interested in more regional haze basics and background. 60% of respondents were interested in additional weighted emissions potential and other modeling results, and also the results of stationary source cost of controls analysis. 40%, 38% were interested in environmental justice, greenhouse gases, and other energy and non-air impacts. And 45% were interested in additional details around mobile and area source controls. So thank you.
Great. Thanks, folks. Appreciate your feedback. That'll help us gauge what areas to focus on the next discussion. And so with that, maybe move to the next slide.
Sorry, that's me.
Great. So now it's an opportunity for us to engage with you and hear in some questions and hopefully answer as many as we can. If there's some that we're not able to answer, we'll make sure and get contact information and follow up accordingly. So with that, Anna, who do we have first for questions?
It looks like we have a few. Let's see. From Amy Marshall, is the 2028 modeling for stationary sources based on allowable PSEL emissions or a projection of actual emissions?
Dee, can you answer that one?
Yeah, that one I believe is based on actual emissions.
And then we have another one from Chad Darby. When would stationary sources need to have controls installed?
I'll take a crack at that one. I believe the guidance from EPA says that reductions need to happen within the planning period that we're committing to. So the SIP plan is for the next 10 years. And so we would need to see those reductions within those 10 years. But also, I think the guidance pushes to have that done within the first 5 years of the plan before we do our update to EPA. Dee, correct me if I'm wrong, but that's my understanding.
I think that's right. And in addition, I think there's sort of, the estimate for the time necessary to install controls also needs to be reasonable. And most engineering estimates that I've seen so far sort of, anticipate, it varies a little bit by facility, but
yeah,
minimum of 2 to 3 years.
Good point. Yeah, I mean, each facility is going to have its own retrofit constraints and timelines, and those, that's something that the department will work with the facilities on understanding and evaluating.
And then we have one from Brian Finneran. Assuming wildfire emissions continue to increase every year, how will the next regional haze plan address that? Will they be considered natural emissions?
Dee, can you answer that one?
Yeah, so that's a really good question, Brian. I also want to say that I see Jamie Peng South and Patty Jacobs have their hand up, so we'll definitely get to you next. So Brian, for wildfire impacts, right now, as you know, the sort of most impaired days metrics removes like the 5% highest days in each year. And so we're really looking at sort of the next tier. When I looked at the most recent data from the Western Regional Air Partnership, the sort of technical services website that they have, that 5% really does seem to be taking care of most of the wildfire days at each monitor. I think so. If the number of days does not increase, even if the fire's severity increases, that 5% rubric will be sufficient to remove most of the wildfire impacts. I do think similar to what you did between round 1 and round 2, if the data shows us that things are changing more quickly than that metric can account for, I think we will definitely look at, coordinating with other Western states to talk about what a reasonable, what a reasonable correction might look like. I think nobody can predict the future right now, so that's all I know. Does that sound like enough, Michael?
Yeah, I think so. Before we jump to the next question too, I did want to flag for folks, we had an omission in our description of outreach that we have to do with required parties for the plan. And one of those parties is tribal nations. And we've been in contact with tribal nations at the start of the process, and we'll be doing that throughout the engagement. And just wanted to make sure and correct that and flag it so that folks know that that's something that we have been doing and will be doing, and it's part of the plan. Okay, next question, Anna.
It looks like Jamie has her hand up.
Hi, can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Hi, I'm sorry. I ended up typing out my question because I didn't know how the technology worked, but I'm happy to just sort of say it out loud. I'm happy to hear that almost 40% of folks are interested in the environmental justice impacts. And I'd like to know if DEQ plans to map out the most vulnerable communities as it pertains to their proximity to the 31 facilities that have been mapped out and identified, and any mega dairies that might be a priority, and whether you guys plan to do an EJ analysis for that, especially since I think I heard that we are out of attainment for NOx.
Jamie, really good question. Thanks for asking. It is something that we're looking at through this regional haze plan. D has specifically included some analysis for environmental justice impacts in relation to some of the benefits that we'll be seeing potentially from reductions from the plan. As Ali mentioned, the focus is visibility reductions, but those reductions have co-benefits, and it's good for us to understand what those co-benefits are and how they impact EJ communities. D, anything else you want to add?
No, I think that covers it. Thank you.
Okay, then we have another person with their hand up.
Jacob?
Hi, this is Rodrigo from Jacobs. Can you hear me well?
Yes.
Great. Thank you very much for your presentation. Wondering if the contribution from out of state has been assessed. If it has been assessed, what is that contribution and what can the state do about it? Contributions such as intercontinental transport or out of state sources.
Yeah, good question. That's something that is being considered as part of the Western states, a collaboration with Westar and RAP. And each state is looking, in part of the planning process with EPA, we're required to look at interstate transport and how we account for international emissions in our forecasts. And Dee, maybe I can have you kind of describe where we're at with that and how we've been working with our partners.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Rodrigo. So I think for out-of-state impacts, we have been in consultation with our Western states partners around the facilities that had the greatest impact on the Class 1 areas in Oregon. It turns out that all the facilities that we had that were sort of concern, the other states are already looking at those in terms of pollution controls and and other things like that. So so that is sort of how we're working with the other states. And then in terms of international transport, I really don't have anything to add to what Michael said. It's we're able to look at it in terms of the modeling. That's largely the domain, I think, of our federal partners. But I leave to other other parties to sort of understand better.
This is Ali. Let me weigh in on that. The international transport again. Well, what we plan to do is identify the international transport as a federal responsibility in our SIPs and rely on the federal government through actions to address that portion. There is a provision, as you know, the EPA is actually working on adjusting the target for to account for international transport. They're moving the target up. We're not inclined to do that at this point. We're trying to talk to our federal counterparts to try and reduce the international transport as opposed to accommodate it in our final planning goal. So we'll see how that goes.
I have a couple of other questions that came to me privately. Thank you, Ali. So Michael, I'll send them out and then you can tell me, we can, who wants to answer them. But I did want to make sure everybody has a chance to hear the questions and comments. So Rob Smith wanted to sort of emphasize that in the next presentation, we also talk about impacts specific to Crater Lake National Park. Brian Finneran asks, under the previous SPART requirements, a fifth factor was considered. That was the amount of visibility improvement from applying controls. Will the four-factor analysis being conducted now include a visibility improvement from each source being evaluated? And those were the two questions. So
for this, so the first one, thank you for the comment, and we appreciate that, and we'll talk more about it at the next presentation. Brian, for your question, this planning cycle, actually, Dee, why don't you take that, and I can jump in with other comments to fill in if I need to.
Sure. So the basic background is the EPA guidance for this particular round of regional haze specifically does not require a specific visibility threshold for installing controls. And while the Western Regional, so that answers the first part of your question. The second part of your question is, while the four-factor analysis does not include that assessment of visibility improvement from each source being evaluated, the Western Regional Partnership is doing a weighted emissions potential as well as a extinction weighted residence time, a bunch of modeling to look at sort of the probable contribution to visibility impairment on the most impaired days from grid cells, from a grid cell sort of matrix. And then, probabilistically, we can sort of say most likely the pollution's coming from this area. And then we look at what are the pollution sources in that area. And that actually gives us a pretty clear indication of who the likely contributors are within an area to the visibility impairment on those most impaired days. Go ahead, Michael.
Yeah, only thing I would add is just to emphasize that this planning cycle is looking at collective impacts from multiple sources on visibility. And so EPA did not give us an individual source visibility impairment target to shoot for our planning purposes. And so we're looking at collective impacts from multiple sources and determining how to make reasonable reductions across the board. So with BART, they had the 0.5 deciview threshold, and in this cycle, we don't have one. Okay, good questions. We really appreciate the engagement here. Any other questions at this point?
Yeah, we have another one from David Bircher. Why are you projecting more future haze? Is this massive projection of wildfires part of it? Also, what is the VW engine program? And note, climate models are projecting a 300 to 500% increase in wildfires.
Good questions. Do you want to take the modeling and then I can cover the VW?
Sure. Let's see. I'm just making sure I'm not on mute. So in terms of the modeling questions, let's see. I can go back. Well, let's not do that because that's just messy. So in terms of the modeling, it does not. So what the modeling does do is it sort of took all the wildfires for the last 5 years in the modeling period, and did basically a random sampling of those fires, and did incorporate some projections that are based on like what fire could look like. And so that's why there's a range in the outcomes. Again, the most impaired days metric attempts to remove a lot of the wildfire impacts from the modeling projections, so that we're really focusing on what is being caused by people. And so that's where that modeling is. Again, I think, as Brian Finneran suggested, we are going to have to work with our other states to adjust those projections and adjust our metrics if we see that wildfires are having an impact that's greater than what is already being sort of accounted for by the most impaired days metrics. I don't know if I answered your question fully.
Can I take a shot at that? This
Yeah.
is Ali. I think it's not the fact that the visibility is getting worse. If you recall, we are trying to reduce the impairment along a uniform glide path to our final goals. And what we're seeing is if we are not meeting our goals, we are meeting these goals in that first planning period, but we are not going to meet those. So it's that we are not getting as much reduced as much improvement as we need to. And that means we need to get further emission reductions. The point at the climate change penalty that is being brought up, that's absolutely correct. I mean, the wildfires will have impact on the worst days. We will have to deal with that. I think that's just something that a reality that we're dealing with through other programs, and hopefully once we if we manage to address that, that gives us additional benefits to this program. But if the trend continues as models indicate, we'll have struggles. I mean, that's just how it is, and it's outside the the controls of this particular program. And I think this is not where the knobs to get that those issues addressed is not within this this regulatory scheme. I hope that answered that.
Thanks, Ali.
And Michael, you were going to talk about VW.
Right. So the VW program that Dee mentioned is part of the settlement with VW historically for the emissions violations and scandals that happened over the years with selling engines that didn't meet standards, and so Oregon received part of the settlement was that Oregon received some funds to correct the emissions and reduce emissions from nitrogen oxides and impacts in the state. DEQ got some additional direction from the Oregon legislature last year on how to spend the remainder of those funds. Originally, we were doing replacement and retrofit of school bus projects. And moving forward, we'll be doing a broader scheme of potentially doing a broader scheme of retrofits and change outs over more sectors of different medium and heavy duty vehicles. And that rulemaking is ongoing, and the plan will be presented to the Environmental Quality Commission in January on how we would administer a grant program to meet the legislature's direction and expend the rest of the funds within the time that we were allowed as part of the settlement. Okay. Anna, any more questions?
Yeah, we have another one from Jamie Payne South. I am happy to hear that almost 40% of folks are interested in the EJ impacts. I'd like to know if DEQ can or will map out the most vulnerable communities as it pertains to their proximity to the 31 facilities identified any mega dairies that may be a priority, and whether DEQ plans to do an EJ analysis for this, especially since you mentioned that Oregon is out of attainment for NOx.
Yeah, I think Jamie asked that same question verbally. So Jamie, let us know if there's follow-ups on that. Appreciate the question.
One from Eric Bowman. How will Oregon DEQ balance the 4-factor analysis, especially the control cost analysis, dollars per ton, with the reasonable progress goals? For example, emission improvements in one part of the state may not have as much impact in the class 1 areas of concern as emission reductions in a different part of the state.
Good question. I guess my response would be that we're taking all of the information that we're collecting as part of the decision-making process, and that includes the work that companies have done for 4-factor analysis to help support us in our planning process. That includes the modeling that is being done at Westar, and that does the back trajectories and identifies where pollution is coming from. And all of that is going to be what we use to help gauge what the reasonable progress is that we need to move forward with.
So, Michael, if I can add to that, it's the requirement is not to hug the glide path and stay at that. So reasonable progress is getting things done to keep us below the glide path, and if we can get reductions at a reasonable cost early, I think those are good things. So we're looking at that. I'm not quite sure if the question suggests that, you know, the impact at a higher cost at one location may not be as impactful in one area versus others, and that's not how exactly what we're looking at this. And as was mentioned, we didn't look at a specific cost threshold per facility as a visibility improvement for a specific facility to judge the reduction requirement. So we're looking at the collective impact here, and judging a cost threshold as being reasonable or not to make those reductions happen.
Thanks, Ali. Any more questions, Anna?
Yeah, we have one from Michael Lang. The management plan for the Columbia River Gorge National Scenic Area requires annual reporting to the Gorge Commission on progress to improve visibility within the gorge. Do you plan to provide a report in 2020 at a Gorge Commission meeting?
Michael, good question. We are working with our partners at the Southwest Clean Air Agency and the Washington Ecology to provide a presentation to the Gorge Commission. I believe it's in December, right, Dee? That's what we're shooting for.
Yeah, we're shooting for a December presentation, and but they also have to approve the agenda and everything else like that. The commission does, but we are in the process of working with the commission staff,
right,
to make that happen.
Okay,
then we have one from Rob Smith. Are there associated climate benefits from controlling pollution for visibility?
Dee, you want to answer that one?
Yeah, sorry, can you say the question again? I don't think I captured all of it.
Are there associated climate benefits from controlling pollution for visibility?
Right, thank you. So the short answer is most of the time. I think there's a couple of different, yeah, so I think that's the, so for instance, the Clean Fuels Program really is under our Office of Greenhouse Gases, and Corianne was so kind to provide me with some language, but she says, while the Clean Fuels Program really is geared towards reducing greenhouse gases, the switch from higher polluting sources of fuel to lower polluting sources of fuel does have clear benefits for reductions of nitrogen oxide, sulfur dioxide, and particulate matter. They're working on getting what those, sort of tons benefits could look like. But since the office is really about controlling greenhouse gases, their main numbers are for estimates of greenhouse gases in the state of Oregon. But they can work on those, and they are. And so I think the short answer is yes. Most of the time, it's a little complicated because sometimes there can be other complications. But I think that's the short answer. Please go ahead, and I think Ali and Michael know more about some of those questions than I do.
Yeah, I mean, just generally there are co-benefits, like we mentioned earlier, with regional haze policy and program moving forward. We're reducing haze, that's the target, but we're also seeing reductions in other air quality pollutants or air pollution overall. And there are instances where you may install a control at a facility that has a greenhouse gas increase, but there's also other programs in Oregon that are addressing those same increases. And there's other ways to approach those controls that may not have a greenhouse gas impact. So that it's a complicated process. And like Dee said, most of the time, I think we can say, yeah, there's greenhouse gas reductions as well.
And that's all the questions I have in the chat.
Okay. Well, thank you all again for your time today. We had a really good turnout. Appreciate your participation. Look forward to having further discussion with all of you in December and provide more updates. And please feel free to reach out to Dee directly with contact information on the slide. Have a great rest of your October, and the slide deck and recording will be posted on DEQ's Regional Haze website, hopefully by the end of the week, but if not, sometime early next week. So thank you all. All right, and I think we can stop recording and close down.